Good morning, church. It's always been a pleasure and a joy for me to be able to hear from some of you as you guys continue to watch these devotions every morning. And it's been really helpful for me. Hopefully, it's been helpful for you. It's been fun for me to be able to share all these devotions and these things that I've been studying and reading up on to be able to share that with you. It's really such a joy. So, with that, let's begin. Now, when I was growing up in Alaska, the Korean Seventh-day Adventist Church in Anchorage worshipped at the conference office. We didn't actually have our own church building. But then with the pastor at that time, as I was growing up, our church built a vision of one day having our own church building to worship. So basically, a long story short, and not to take too much time, in the early 2000s, our pastor had found a location in Midtown Anchorage. And quickly, our small 85-member congregation began to come together to build the future home of the Anchorage Korean Seventh-day Adventist Church. Now, we started off obviously with the foundation, and it was a concrete foundation, and basically this foundation became the outline of what the building would look like in terms of where it would stand. And I remember as a kid that, we would run through the basement and run across and imagine just what the church would look like. And some of the older members and people that were helping construct the church would, tell us Tim, this is going to be the sanctuary. Don't run here. And here's the, fellowship hall. Oh, these are the classrooms. And I remember just imagining and envisioning what this church would eventually look like. And surely, but slowly and moment by moment, the church actually started to look like a church. And just the whole project and the church itself was truly a miracle. Now, when I think about buildings, or in this case, when I think about the church that we were building, before you have the walls, the roof, and, the lighting and the pews and the flooring and all the whole nine yards, before you have all of this, the foundation, right, which is really the hidden part of the entire building, is by far the most important. Yet, having these walls, having a roof, having the doors, these also become very important, right? Because that's what everyone sees. And so without it, you can't really say you have a building without any walls. That would be kind of weird, right? If you were to have just the foundation and nothing else, people wouldn't be able to see anything, right? There's really no meaning then. And it's the same vice versa, right? If you have just the walls and roof, it probably won't last long, right? One person leans on a wall, everything will come tumbling down. Or if a wind comes by and blows it over, the rains fall, you get it, right? You're not gonna have a building. The same can be said about a lot of other things that require both a foundation and the visible part. So in many things, not just buildings, the importance and connection between strong foundation and strong outcome or results is quite clear. And this can be said also about our spiritual foundation and our spiritual outsides, for lack of better terms. Now we continue with Paul's letter to Timothy in the book of 1 Timothy, and we come to chapter 3. And some of you guys, as you're reading this, you might feel like you can't really relate, because here we find Paul talking about the qualifications of becoming an elder and a deacon. Then in the last few verses, Paul justifies and explains why he's telling Timothy about these qualifications. And I think it's, in a way, Paul is talking to us and telling us why these are important, even if you're not an elder or a deacon. Look at 1 Timothy 3, 1 verse 15. It says, "If I am delayed, you will know how people ought to conduct themselves in God's household, which is the church of the living God, the pillar and the foundation of the truth." So remember, Paul is writing this letter while he's probably in prison, and it looks like he's at the point of his life where things are just not the same, right? He's aging, and later as we get to the end of the letter of 1 Timothy, you'll see why this is the case. But basically, he's telling Timothy that he's going to be delayed, but he's making a very interesting point about the church. You see, he refers to the church as God's household, which is the church of the living God. And then he makes this point and kind of an analogy about the pillar and foundation of truth. You see, the foundation here represents our beliefs, our morals, our qualifications, right? This is what builds us. This is the outline. And then the pillars represent our behaviors, our response, and that's what people see on the outside. So in other words, Paul is telling us that the church is a model of the gospel truth. Therefore, we should conduct ourselves in a way that reflects that. You see, in the eyes of Paul, if our foundation, if our beliefs, if our theology, if these things are not founded in the truth, as in the gospel truth, then our pillars, our behaviors, our response, our conduct, the part of the church that people will see, there's no way that it can stand for long. It will fall apart. But what this means is that when we have a strong foundation in God, very naturally, our pillars, our conduct will also stand strong. And as a result, people will be able to see and understand the gospel message and truth that Paul is preaching about when they simply look at the church. Remember how I said at the beginning of today's devotion that you might feel like that this isn't really for you? Well, think about it again. You are a part of the church. You are one of the pillars. You are what people will see when they look at the church. So you see, it's very important that we, first of all, as a church, place our foundation in the very place where we can find the gospel truth, and that's in Scripture. Then as pillars, as we set our foundation or our pillars into the foundation of the gospel truth, the way that we respond, our conduct, that ultimately becomes the way that we can witness to the world. So that's really cool. So in reality, you guys are leaders. You are, in a sense, these elders and deacons of the church, because it's through your influence, it's through having a strong foundation and pillar that's found in the gospel that you can lead people to Christ. So remember this. Let's build a strong foundation in the gospel truth and let our pillars of conduct stand firm for all to see.